Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, The Case for Free Speech with John Stuart Mill. In this video we're going to be looking at free speech versus abstinence-only education. Hopefully, if everything's working, this video should be going live as a premiere. If you have questions during that premiere, I will be available in the chat alongside to answer those questions and respond to your thoughts, as I will hopefully be for the rest of the videos in this series, which will be going up about every other week. So, abstinence-only sex education is a movement in American education which advocates censoring the information provided to students about methods to prevent sexually transmitted diseases other than abstinence from any sexual activity. Basically, this is a public policy that forces censorship of teachers when they're talking about sex education and when they're explaining things to students. It is limiting those teachers' freedom of speech, and therefore it's something that we're talking about here. John Stuart Mill advocated for freedom of speech being very, very permissive. Abstinence-only education cuts that free speech off, so this is a problem. This video is going to take abstinence-only education really, though, just as an example of a type of censorship that Mill didn't explicitly address, but he would surely have had opinions on. Government censorship of factual information for the purpose of influencing public action. So this is not taking some claim that we're unsure whether or not it's true and saying you can't talk about that because we really doubt that it's true or we think that it's really immoral. Rather, it's taking a claim and saying we believe this is true, but we're not going to talk about it. As the government, we're going to prevent you from talking about it because we don't want people to do that thing or to learn about that thing or have knowledge about that thing. So, abstinence-only education is a specific example of this, but there's a range of applications that we'll look at later in the video. But before looking at that, it's important to note that abstinence-only education continues to be a failure. Reviews of the literature have shown that it does nothing to decrease sexual activity, but it does increase the likelihood of disease transmission. There's a range of studies there if you're interested. If you believe that science can convey truth, this is what the science says. If you're a skeptic like me about science, you can doubt that either it is effective or not effective, but you can't claim that it is effective. So either you're a skeptic like me and you doubt everything, or if you accept the science, you say, wow, this is really ineffective. The point is that censoring information, at least in this case, can't be shown to be an effective way of achieving either the stated goal of preventing disease transmission or the thinly veiled goal of preventing sex before marriage. Of all the types of censorship in this series, this is one of the most restrictive because it does not claim that the information is false or that the information itself is immoral, but simply that people cannot be trusted with it. The idea of a government reaching in and saying, this is true, but we don't trust you with that information, especially about a scientific discovery or scientific facts. From the perspective of Mill, I'm going to offer 3 arguments against the claim that there is some information which is too dangerous to know. Now, to remember what we're doing in this series, I'm a skeptic. I'm doubting everything, including Mill's arguments. But because Mill's not around to make them, I'm taking on Mill's position as a good indirect skeptic would and seeing if we can offer some defense of his positions in the face of these modern arguments. Let's take a look. So first, the clearest argument for the freedom of speech in this case is efficacy. Hiding the truth from people inevitably backfires. Whether that's in the case of abstinence-only education not successfully reducing sex before marriage and in fact increasing disease transmission, or simply that people find out the information that you were trying to hide. Someone will test your claims and uncover the truth, particularly when those claims are about scientific facts. And discovering that the government hid the truth from them, they will be less likely to trust anything the government says in the future, making actual information campaigns significantly less effective. This policy not only undermines its own efficacy, but the efficacy of any other government information campaign, even those that are actually putting the truth and the whole truth out there. The next problem is autonomy, which is freedom. So, lacking information is a restriction on personal autonomy. If you do not know that you can do something, say use a condom, you are not free to do it. This is problematic not simply because it is a restriction on the freedom of those providing the information, namely the freedom of the teachers whose job it is to provide students with information and facts and truths about the world, but also on those receiving the information because it restricts their autonomy to make choices based on information throughout their lives. Such restriction on personal freedom is immoral, so such a policy is immoral. Third, such policies subvert the search for truth in favor of government dominance of its people. This is easily a sufficient reason for Mill to have a problem with this. Mill advocated free speech largely because it could eventually lead to true and accurate beliefs, that in the marketplace of ideas, eventual discussion would lead us to have true, correct beliefs about the world. And if we censor some of those things, then we won't arrive at those eventual truths. This is not simply censoring opinions that we think are wrong. Rather, it's actively censoring true facts in the world to prevent people from acting in ways that the government doesn't like. Preventing people from speaking about things you believe to be true is an effective way to not only diminish the project of searching for knowledge, but entirely subvert it. Many consider truth as a good in itself, but it's also instrumental for achieving other goods by using truth to make free and informed decisions. Therefore, limiting the information provided to people is immoral, at least on Mill's view. Now, the harm principle does have limits, and there are surely limits that the government must put on the information that it provides. An extreme example would be giving out nuclear launch codes seems like a source of direct harm. It seems if you gave, published on television, here's a nuclear launch code, call this number, and you'll set off a war that will kill most of the population of the world, that action leads to very direct harm and is a problem. And so, therefore, things like that are exempt. The government is allowed to keep some secrets to keep the public good. However, things like hiding studies that particular drugs are addictive and dangerous is not. In this way, it seems like scientific information, things that are kind of within the public good that could benefit everyone, is privileged, particularly that information which directly affects individuals' lives. If my milk is going to cause me cancer, you have no right to censor that information, and therefore limit my freedom. If condoms are going to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, you have no right to limit my choices by not telling me about that. Now, there are some borderline cases, such as censoring information on how to make a bomb, or instructions for 3D printing a gun. For Mill, this would likely depend on the context. Giving instructions to a religious fanatic intent on killing hundreds is very different than giving instructions to a scientist trying to understand how to better disarm bombs. The problem is, in the internet age, it's difficult to know what someone will do with the information you provide. And it's hard to know whether, when you post something online, someone's viewing it for academic research or someone's on the edge and might be viewing it for the purpose of harming others. But my intuition is that Mill would come down on the side of allowing information, but regulating or monitoring the actual items, i.e. bomb-making supplies and 3D printers. When he talks about corn dealers, when he was defending the harm principle, he doesn't say that it's a problem that you wrote in a local newspaper that corn dealers are starving the poor, and someone that happens to be in the mob that's outside the corn dealer house reads that in the paper. That's not the problem. The problem is shouting that to the angry crowd that's about to storm the house of the corn dealer. Abstinence-only education limits the freedom of speech of teachers to do exactly what they have a duty to do: provide information. It is ineffective at either preventing premarital sex or sexually transmitted disease. It limits the freedom of students to make their own choices. It denigrates the search for truth. For all these reasons, I argue that Mill would advocate that such a practice be stopped, and as he would any government practice of limiting the factual, scientific information provided to its citizens, which would not cause direct harm. Next up, we're doing a controversial one that's probably going to get demonetized, which is free speech versus feminism, where we're going to be looking at free speech and pornography. But before we get to that one, please offer your thoughts in the comments below. I'm very curious what people think about this. Do you think Mill's arguments are sufficient to say that the government shouldn't censor scientific information? Or do you think there are some situations where the government should not provide people with information about scientific research, even when it wouldn't cause that kind of immediate direct harm of nuclear codes in that situation? And how do you deal with those borderline cases? I'm very curious. So leave those in the comments below and stay tuned. We'll have a different video next week, but then in 2 weeks we will have free speech versus feminism, where we will be looking at the controversial subject of pornography. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.